just to minimise disruption as people enter the room, and then we'll be kicking off soon. Thank you very much for joining. In the spirit of the event as well, if you could turn off your videos, that would also be appreciated, just because of the carbon footprint of video being shared is often the biggest kind of component of a carbon footprint call for both Teams and Zoom. So if you could turn off your webcams as well as being on mute, that would be appreciated. Many thanks. I'll just give 30 more seconds for the last people to come into the room, and then we'll be kicking off. Perfect. I think we've got most people now, so thank you very much to those who've joined. And just a quick point before we start, this meeting is being recorded today, just for everyone's knowledge there. So thank you everyone who has joined. Really appreciate you attending today. Just a final reminder, as a lot of people have had Zooms and Teams over the last kind of 18 months or so, but just to make sure you're always on mute, and if you could also turn off your webcam just to decrease the carbon footprint of the call, that would also be appreciated. At the end of the call, we'll go into Q&A, and there's a chat bar function which is on Teams. So please do post as we go through the sessions today. As questions come up, please do post in that chat bar, and then we can cover them off at the end. It'd be much appreciated. So thank you very much for attending. I'm Leah Waterhouse and I work for NatWest. Within NatWest, I work for our climate propositions team. So what does that job title actually mean? It means kind of getting climate related propositions into our customers' hands and really helping people like you who have SMEs to make their transition to net zero or to decarbonising their business as much as possible. We've got a lot of great speakers today. So the format of the session will be panel sessions with each speaker speaking for about 10 to 15 minutes, finishing with myself, and then we'll go into the Q&A as I mentioned. So yeah, don't be shy on questions. We know COP26 obviously kicked off yesterday, so we're hoping for a lot of questions and a lot of engagement in that Q&A session. Obviously, there's been a lot of discussion in the media over the last couple of days around what COP will achieve and what it's aiming to achieve, and really making sure we as a country and we as a global community make the most of this opportunity to really make some hard-hitting climate commitments that really make sure we're starting our net zero journey as early as possible, and making a real start there. Just before we started, we also wanted to cover off what net zero means. It'll be in a lot of our panel sessions today. And essentially, this means that ensuring the carbon levels that we have at the moment in the atmosphere remain as they are. So anything that we do to produce carbon, we also kind of do whatever we can to reduce that carbon back down. So it might be the common kind of analogy which is used for people's private lives is you might go on a flight, and that's obviously emitting carbon, but then when you get back from your flight, you would offset that carbon that you've produced by planting a tree, for example, meaning that really there's no difference to the levels of carbon in the atmosphere. Offsetting always needs to be seen as a way of a last resort almost. We want to be trying to really remove carbon from the atmosphere wherever possible and reduce the amount of carbon we're emitting into the atmosphere wherever possible. But we do know that we can't stop being human beings. We can't stop emitting all carbon tomorrow. It's not realistic. So what we can do is reduce as much as possible, and then where we can't, really offset that and make sure we are absorbing as much carbon from the atmosphere with things such as trees and other natural carbon sinks. So we just wanted to cover that off. Obviously, COP's been a really good starter for 10 for this discussion today, and hopefully that bit around net zero is kind of set off for those who didn't know what net zero is, what that is, and how we can assist you today in making sure your SME is getting on your journey to net zero. So without further ado, I'll pass on to Bethan, who's attending today from the British Business Bank. She'll be here to discuss their paper around smaller businesses and their transition to net zero. So I'll pass over to you, Beth. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Leah. Bore da. Good morning, everybody. I'm Beth Bannister and I represent the British Business Bank in Wales, and I'm really pleased to be with you today for this discussion. For those of you who don't know the British Business Bank, I thought it'd be useful just to start by giving you a very brief overview to understand who we are and what we do, before I go on to share some research we've undertaken to understand the role businesses can play in achieving net zero. First slide, please. Thank you. So the British Business Bank is 100% owned by central government, but we're independently managed, and we're an economic development bank. And as it says on the slide there, our core mission is to drive sustainable growth and prosperity across the UK and to enable the transition to a net zero economy by improving access to finance for smaller businesses. So that's really our key focus. We support businesses by ensuring they have access to the funding they need at every stage of their life cycle. Next slide, please. So it's important to note that we don't invest directly into businesses. Instead, we deploy our funding via a range of delivery partners, such as banks and venture capital funds. And so you'll see on the slide there a bit of a flavour of our existing funding programmes, which are supporting a number of Welsh businesses in finding the right finance for their transition to net zero, as well as providing funding to businesses that are tackling environmental issues more directly. So I won't spend a huge amount of time on this. You can hopefully read there the impact that we've had in Wales to date. But I thought I'd quickly share just 2 case studies with you of Welsh businesses who have secured funding via our programmes and are really pertinent for our discussion today. Firstly, I wanted to mention a company called Riversimple. They're based in Llandrindod, Wales, and they design and build hydrogen fuel cell cars. And they secured money from the British Business Bank's Future Fund programme last year. That was a programme designed to support innovative pre-revenue businesses during the COVID pandemic. And Riversimple have a real vital role to play in decarbonising transport in an effective way. Secondly, another great case study for Wales, a business called Transcend Packaging. They're based in Hengoed in South Wales, and they manufacture food and beverage packaging aimed at reducing use of single-use plastic. So they're the largest paper straw manufacturer, with contracts with the likes of McDonald's and rhai. And they received Regional Angels programme monies via the BBB. And that programme is designed to encourage early stage equity investment outside of the M25 and reduce regional imbalances in deployment of our funds. So 2 great Welsh businesses who have been able to secure funding they need to grow, whilst also playing a real important role in tackling environmental issues. Apart from funding, we also provide a real key part of my role is to really understand the challenges facing smaller businesses in their access to finance journey. And there's no greater challenge at present than the transition to a net zero economy, as Leah touched upon earlier. So it's really important for me to understand the challenges faced by small businesses and to help them to access the funding they need to address some of those challenges. And that's why I'm joining the discussion today. The bank has recently undertaken significant research into understanding the important role small businesses can play in the transition to net zero. So I'll summarise some of the findings here today, which hopefully will provide useful context for the rest of the discussion. Next slide, please. So the bank's latest research report, called Smaller Businesses and Their Transition to Net Zero, was published a few weeks ago, and I'll after this presentation, I'll pop the link to the report in the chat box. And the report highlights the potential influence of UK smaller businesses and the considerable contribution they could make to wider net zero objectives if they all made changes to reduce their carbon footprint. So as you can see on the slide there, smaller businesses account for almost 30% of all current UK greenhouse gas emissions and around half of total emissions from UK businesses, which is surprising and is the same proportion as larger businesses. The report also found that awareness of net zero is becoming significant at about 60%, although only around half of businesses say decarbonisation is a near-term priority for them. In terms of the stage of transition to net zero, 76% of businesses are yet to implement comprehensive decarbonisation strategies, and only 3% of smaller businesses say they've measured their carbon footprint in the past 5 years and subsequently set an emissions reducing target. So it demonstrates there that their businesses are really still at the early stages of transition to net zero. Next slide, please. So what are the barriers preventing action on net zero? So businesses within the survey identified more than 20 barriers preventing action on net zero, which demonstrates just how complex a process it is in addressing these issues on a wide scale, and really demonstrates the need for a tailored approach to support these businesses. But some common themes emerged, and as you can see there, the research shows that costs are the main barrier perceived by smaller businesses in their transition to net zero, particularly upfront capital costs, which demonstrates the importance of having access to the funding that they need. Other barriers mentioned included feasibility, such as lack of control or lack of appropriate technology. And the other barrier noted was lack of information, which was preventing businesses from taking action. And only 11% of smaller businesses have access to external finance to support net zero actions, although 22% said they are prepared to do so in the next 5 years. So businesses are looking to take action relatively quickly on this. So when it comes to funding, the majority of businesses wouldn't consider external borrowing to support actions, and this may be a general reluctance to borrow more monies, particularly given the challenging financial climate that we're still in, and the fact that businesses have taken on significant debt over the past year to manage throughout the COVID period. But it also could result from gaps in the supply of finance, or maybe a lack of understanding of where to turn for access to the right funding options. And when it comes to the sources of funding, and we'll hear more about this later from the other panel members, so grant funding was the most likely source of finance businesses were seeking to access to achieve their net zero plans, followed by retained cash or profit within the business, followed by external finance from banks or other lenders. Next slide, please. So we can see that finance is a big part of the solution to drive more action on the net zero agenda. And SMEs, small businesses in Wales, play a real pivotal role in the UK economy. And it's clear that net zero targets can't be met without strong engagement from SMEs. So it presents a huge opportunity for businesses. That being said, it's really important for business owners to feel empowered and informed in making those relevant steps to decarbonise. And those of us within the ecosystem, including myself, have a real important role to play in supporting businesses on that journey by raising awareness of funding options, signposting to sources of finance, helping businesses to access specialist advisors, and providing digestible information that's easy for SMEs to understand. And BBB will continue to play a role within that ecosystem via our financial products and programmes. Final slide, please. So hopefully that provides real useful context on the important role small businesses can play within the net zero agenda. As mentioned, I'll share the link in the chat box after the presentations, and happy to answer any questions later on in this session. I'll now hand over to Rhian from the Development Bank of Wales, who'll tell you more about the funding available via the Development Bank of Wales and the importance of ESG. Over to you, Rhian.
Thanks, Beth. Good morning, everybody. As Beth has said, real pleasure to be with you all here this morning. I always still find these all a bit bizarre where you are just talking to yourself, but hopefully we will get lots more engagement towards the end of the session with the Q&A. So I'm going to talk to you today about the Development Bank of Wales and the role that we are playing and hope to continue to play in this important topic. I'll go on to the next slide, please, because I'm briefly going to rush through some of the introduction to the Development Bank for those of you who don't know us. So we are a subsidiary of the Welsh Government. We were established as a development bank back in 2017, but we're around, have been around for a lot longer than that. providing funding to Welsh businesses. And that is our role. We provide commercial funding to businesses in Wales, covering both equity and loan investment, and are very much complementary to the private sector. So quite often we will be investing perhaps alongside a bank or alongside another source of equity that's available in the market. So if we move on to the next slide. To give you an idea of our targets, these were set back in 2017 with a 5-year plan for what the Development Bank would deliver. Where we are today, we are ahead of the game in terms of the amount of direct investment that we've made, the jobs we've created, and the number of businesses that we've supported. Another element that we measure is the amount of private investment that comes alongside the investments that we do. That is actually tracking slightly behind at the moment, but what I guess none of us knew when we set up the Development Bank is what would happen in the last couple of years, and our investment has increased significantly. Last year we invested another 100 million to support companies as they were going through the COVID crisis, but what we did mean is that there was less private sector investment coming alongside us. So if we move on to the next slide, please. This just gives you a quick overview of everything that we do. So we invest, as I've mentioned, from as little as £1,000 up to a £10 million investment into a Welsh-based business, covering both loan and equity investment. And the loans can be fairly patient in their structure. We can go up to 15-year term now, so we can ensure that the repayment structure suits the needs of the business. And all business stages, so we support startups right the way to growth capital, and at the end succession deals when people are looking to buy or sell their business. We have a dedicated property development fund which is supporting home builders in providing the finance for them, and we've seen a particular growth area in Angels Invest Wales, which is where we're looking to find business angels who are looking to make investments in Welsh businesses. You may not know we manage the Help to Buy administration on behalf of Welsh Government, which is supporting individuals buying their homes. And we've got quite a unique asset in Economic Intelligence Wales, which is a collaboration between us and academics, including Cardiff University and ONS, where we can come up with specific research on Welsh activity, which is very useful for us in terms of educating what we need to do and where perhaps there are further gaps in the market. And lastly, we're an impact investor. I mean, that's something that we've been really from the beginning. It's in our DNA. We don't just invest for financial return. We also invest for the impact that we do, whether that is jobs or whether that is companies looking to have a significant impact on the environment. And more about that a little later towards the end of the presentation. So if we skip on to the next page, please. So you may or may not be aware that Welsh Government published their net zero plan last week. And it talked in there very much about a Team Wales approach. This isn't something that we're going to be able to do individually. We all have to work together to address a significant challenge that's ahead of us. And the Welsh Government called for pledges for various different organisations as part of that document. And this is the DPW pledge. So this is what we put out there to say what we are doing in the short term to address both our internal carbon footprint and looking to make real strides there, but also what we're doing to support our portfolio of companies. We've got about 2,000 companies in our portfolio, so a reasonable amount of businesses to have conversations with. And before I go on, I'm just going to mention some context for you, because what I found useful in the net zero plan was an idea of where the carbon contribution comes from within Wales. So based on 2019 data, it told us that 38% of the carbon emissions were coming from business and industry. So very important for us in terms of where the business sits. Important to note, though, that around half of that comes from some particular big industries that you probably are no surprise, you know, the steel making, iron making that we've got within Wales. They are a big contributor to that number. 19% came from our electricity and heat generation, 17% from transport, 14% from agriculture, and then 10% from our residential building. So I found that quite useful context to see where we could really make a difference. So we go on to the next slide, please. So I mentioned earlier we make equity investment, and equity investment predominantly is in businesses that are innovating. And I've just given a couple of really good examples here of businesses that we've supported. So Vortex IoT is an Internet of Things company based in West Wales, and they developed air quality sensors, and they give fantastic real-time information as to the quality of the air in the location where they are. And they've got some really interesting projects going on at the moment with London-based councils, where they're monitoring the air quality and allowing the council to change the traffic control system in the area to directly improve the quality of air for the school children that are in the area. So really exciting projects that company is embarking on. The second one on the slide is a company called Agexio, and they're an agri-tech company. I mentioned the contribution that agriculture makes earlier on. This company has got technology that allows farmers and others to really employ high precision farming techniques, and significantly increases the yield of about up to 20% the farmers can get from the land. So significantly improving the efficiency of the operations that they do. The two on the bottom, the first is Bombora, which is a wave company developing a wave power technology down in West Wales. We provided them with loan funding actually to give them working capital to cope with the cash flow requirements of a large grant that they'd secured, some European grant funding there. And the last one is Marine Power Systems, which is an offshore wind technology, again based in West Wales. And they actually secured money from one of our angel investors, which DBW matched with some further equity investment. So some really good examples of innovation and companies that we're supporting. But it was quite clear in the message from Welsh Government that it isn't just going to be about the new innovations. There's also activity that can be done at all levels in all businesses. So if we move on to the next slide, please. Keen to give you a little snapshot of this one. This is a dedicated fund that we have called the Local Energy Fund. And their remit is to support community groups with renewable energy projects. And Welsh Government are very supportive of this area. They want to see more renewable energy, but they're very keen to see it being owned in community ownership, and that's what this fund does. So the picture you see there is of the velodrome, and we supported a company called EGNI in the rollout of solar panels across a number of schools, businesses, and the velodrome is one of the biggest. And the solar panel was still owned by the company, but they, in many cases, provided low-cost energy, or in some cases even zero-cost energy, to the owner of the building. And of course, all the profits from that entity can now flow back into further community projects. So a great example there of a rapid rollout of solar panels across South Wales. So on to the next slide, please. So I mentioned earlier about innovation is important, but it isn't only going to be about the big innovative project. It's also about what we can all do. And the stat earlier of around 30% of the carbon coming from business and industry, and indeed what Beth talked about earlier, just demonstrates that we all have a role to play in this area and we all have something to do. So the policy that's coming out of Welsh Government at the moment, as you might expect, is quite focused on some of the big contributors, so it's quite focused on industry. But what was very clear from their plan last week is that companies looking to access grant support or other business support from the Welsh Government will be expected to demonstrate how they are contributing to this agenda, will be expected to demonstrate how they are addressing their carbon footprint. So I think it's an important thing for everybody to have on their radar. And of course, policy is just one thing. You know, it does come down to delivery as well, and how can SMEs deliver some of the solutions that they'd like to take forward. What I would say is it is quite confusing, and I think that came out in the survey from British Business Bank as well. There is questions about access to finance, but I also think it is also around access to some support before you get to that. So consultancy advice for companies that they understand what they can do. There is advice out there. There's the Carbon Trust that are well known and well experienced in this area. They did operate an interest-free loan, but interestingly, that's no longer available. But what they tell me is the loan was one thing, but actually the more important element that they provided was the advice. It was the support to go into the businesses and explain what was possible. The other one worth mentioning that we work with a lot is Business Wales. So Business Wales is the free business support within Wales, and they've got their green growth pledge. So they have a number of advisors across Wales, resource efficiencies advisors, that will go out to SMEs, and we make a lot of referrals here for our portfolio companies and work with the business to come up with a plan. And if the company is interested, can sign up to the Green Growth Pledge as part of that as well. So quick example, Evans & Co. This was one of our companies. We supplied them with a loan to allow them to relocate. They're an accountancy firm based down in Milford. But they also decided to embark on the Green Growth Pledge at the same time. So we referred them over to Business Wales. They embarked on the journey and have made lots of positive changes, sort of looking at the lifespan of the products that they use, taking a close look at their supply chain and trying to make sure that was as efficient and as possible. So just an interesting example, really, of an accountancy business where you think perhaps there's not an awful lot they could do, actually making some really positive steps, which has been extremely well received by their employees and customers. So a great example there. And I think that point is quite key for me. You know, we're all well aware of the requirement for us all to do something, and everybody does need to do something to help address this climate emergency. I mean, as Leah said at the beginning, you know, it is very topical at the moment with COP26 going on at the same time. But there are other benefits. There are the financial rationale for you doing some of these things, being more energy efficient. But also it's very important to customers and very important to employees, and even more so now. I mean, customers, for example, some larger businesses need to carry out what are called Scope 3 reviews on their emissions. And that means looking at their suppliers. So that potentially means looking at you in their supply chain to see how you're performing and how that then contributes to what they need to disclose. I had a really interesting example a couple of weeks ago of a company that was selling, actually. So they were up for sale and they were very close to completing the process, and it fell at the 11th hour. And the reason why it fell is because the acquiring business wasn't satisfied with the company's approach to ESG, so environmental, governance and social. And I think we'll get more of that. You know, investors are looking at it, acquirers are looking at it. So I think, you know, that is a good sign of things to come. And lastly, just mention B Corps. You may come across it. A couple of our businesses have become accredited. It's a recognised accreditation covering environmental, but also the social and governance aspect. And it tends to be a very well recognised accreditation for consumer-facing products. So you may have seen it for things that you're buying personally if they're a B Corp company. So just moving on to the last slide. So what's next for us? In some ways, we're at the beginning of our journey in terms of what we need to do. Obviously, there's delivering the pledges that I've already mentioned. We have an internal working group within DPW working what we need to do next. We assessed our carbon footprint last year and came together with our plan for what we needed to do next. Very closely collaborating with Welsh Government and others at the moment as to whether there is a gap in the market for any new funds or services. So really interested to hear your views on that directly. We have the ability, if we see a gap in the market, to take that to Welsh Government and other funders to see if we can come up with a solution there. So that is something that is very active at the moment. And then we're putting more time to develop our framework on the wider ESG, so including the environmental side of it, into the investments that we make. So how do we assess better what the company's environmental credentials are? What are they doing? And what's the risk to the investment, which is becoming an even more important aspect of our consideration. And then equipping our portfolio teams. I mentioned the size of our portfolio. Each company has got a dedicated point of contact within DPW, and we need to make sure that we are there to provide you with the right information to help you on this journey. You know, we all appreciate it's exceptionally busy running a business. So if we can be if we can be help to you there and point you in the right direction, then that's what the team need to do. And lastly, we have to collect data to ensure what we're doing is right, and we can change it to make sure it's as effective as possible. So that's a real whistle-stop tour across all of the activities of DPW, and happy to pick up any questions towards the end. I'm now going to hand over to Lucas, who is going to talk about the power of collaboration in research. Thanks, Lucas.
Thank you very much, Rhian, and thank you for inviting me to speak this morning. Yeah, my name's Lucas Brown. I'm Knowledge Exchange and Impact Manager at the University of South Wales. And just picking up on the point that Beth raised in her survey, which, one of the key barriers to achieving a low carbon economy is due to the lack of appropriate technology in businesses. And the university is here to play a role to help businesses actually access the appropriate technologies. So if I could have the next slide, please. So, as I say, as a brief introduction, for those of you that may not be aware of, the breadth of the University of South Wales, so we're actually formed from the University of Glamorgan and University of Wales Newport fairly recently, about 5 years ago now. 24,000 students and nearly 3,500 staff. So we have huge capacity and capability to impact on the regional economy. Could I have the next slide, please? Yeah, we have 4 key campuses, 2 up near Pontypridd, the Treforest and the Glyntaff campuses, where our engineering and computing faculty is based at Treforest, and the life sciences and education at Glyntaff. Our Cardiff campus, which is one of our newest campuses, focuses on creative industries. And then we have our Newport campus, which includes cyber security as one of our key areas of expertise. Could I have the next slide, please? And these were the results of a recent study that we have completed of the impact of the university on the economy. And I think the figures speak for themselves. We are a major educational provider in the region, and with 7,500 graduates each year coming out and working for local businesses. We're making a tremendous contribution through the undergraduate provision alone. But if I can go on to the next slide, please. But it's also through our research and collaborative activities and indeed our enterprise activities that we're able to make a contribution. So we actually have one of the largest number of graduate startups in the sector, and that's a major area of growth for us. But our contribution through collaborative research and innovation was estimated at 25 million per annum, and a significant number of jobs created from our collaborations. So I'm going to go on a little bit now to talk about some of that. Next slide, please. So part of our 2030 vision is to develop a university which has high impact research in 4 key areas: sustainable environment, crime, security and justice, health and well-being, and the creative industries. It's useful to, it was interesting perhaps to point out at this point that sustainable environment is one of our main areas of research, and our research began way back in the, just over 100 years ago, when the university was established as a result of the mining industry. So the first research projects were looking at how health and safety in the mining industry could be improved. Just over 100 years later, we're now looking at how technologies can be used to improve our carbon performance. So the university is responding to the challenges of the day, and sustainable environment is at the top of our list. As I say, we're focused on applied research. and that very much involves working with industry partners external to the university. And we're very much driven by our impact on society and the economy. As the previous slides demonstrated, we are measuring and observing our impact externally. We're not focused completely internally on our sort of academic performance, although of course that is important, but our external impact has an equal importance to us. So we're looking to develop mutually beneficial strategic partnerships that address key challenges, and as we've just been discussing, you know, the zero carbon agenda is a key priority for us. Okay, if we can have the next slide, please. Thank you. So these are some of the partners that we're working with at the moment. The university is open to collaborations and short and long-term partnerships with a whole range of different organisations, from you know, heavy industry through to agriculture and you know, small and large companies. So and the third sector as well. So we are you know, we're open to collaborations across the board. If I could have the next slide, please. So I want to talk now a little bit about a key area of research and development that we have, which is looking at hydrogen, the hydrogen economy, and how we can demonstrate hydrogen technologies. We have a centre based down at Baglan near Swansea, which houses some fantastic facilities for demonstrating hydrogen technologies. We're working with local industry across South Wales on an industry cluster project to help those partners reduce their carbon footprints. And we have a strong team of researchers working with the Welsh Government and other policy makers to develop, you know, a policy environment that is supportive of those environmental ambitions. So that's all funded through a variety of government, both Welsh Government and UK Government innovation funds. And as I say, it's one of the most successful areas of research that the university is involved with. If I could have the next slide, please. In terms of you know, how we engage with the sector, industry sectors, we often are involved in projects where there's one partner working with the university. In this area, obviously, it's a hugely complex task to make an impact on environmental performance, and we're working with companies up and down the supply chain, up and down the energy supply chain, from supply through to transportation. And hydrogen as a fuel for the future has been talked about for a long time. The UK government has just recently, a few weeks ago, published its hydrogen strategy, and the university is proud to say that we've been involved in contributing to the development of that strategy through some of the projects we've been involved with. And we will continue to work with companies to make hydrogen, help hydrogen become a real option for motorists. Perhaps one of the most visible areas that will see the benefits. So as well as battery powered cars, which obviously have become a reality, perhaps faster than a lot of people thought. We should be seeing hydrogen fuel cars not far around the corner. If I could have the next slide, please. So one of the areas of research we worked on, and this goes back to around 2010, we started looking at this. So this isn't recent developments, but we started looking at the issue of hydrogen storage. So for cars to be able to carry enough hydrogen to go on a reasonable trip to London or perhaps Edinburgh, the size of the hydrogen fuel tanks needed to be reduced considerably. And we started some research, as I say, over 10 years ago, which we've now successfully patented and are working with a renewable energy provider, Hydro-Quebec, to actually scale up the technology to a scale at which it can be manufactured. So, as I say, we hope that this technology will provide an alternative to energy storage, and as well as transport applications, energy storage, off-grid energy storage systems is also another application. If I can have the next slide, please. So these are, apologies about the formatting on this slide, but a number of the other centres that are very business focused and are working with industry in this area are our photonics centre. So in terms of, you might not think perhaps that's related to environmental performance, but we are looking at new ways of using photonics to help companies in a range of ways, including to benefit their environmental footprint. CAPSI is our automotive power systems engineering centre, and they've been working with the automotive sector for now 7 or 8 years on achieving better performance batteries. The AD Centre for Wales, Centre of Excellence for Wales, is looking at AD, anaerobic digestion, which is basically a way to treat biological waste. And our researchers have been, again, it's one of our extremely successful areas of industrial collaborative research, where researchers have been working with policymakers and industry to help AD become a more viable technology to treat waste, and obviously working with water companies, but also a whole range of other companies in agriculture and technology companies feeding into that sector. So those are some of the centres that the university have, which are totally dedicated to focusing on business. If we could have the next slide, please. So how do we actually engage with businesses, and how can businesses access our research? Well, there's obviously it does come down to funding, and perhaps 2 ways to look at this are some funding projects are led by proposals led by the university, and the university will look for partners to work with to secure funding, and that involves perhaps delivery through a researcher, a research student. It could be a partnership with staff, so either Welsh government funded or UK government funded partnership. And we are looking for companies to work with on these, often not huge projects, quite small scale projects. The other type of funding that's available is led by companies. Proposals are led by companies to secure the funding, and the university has a kind of secondary role to play in terms of supporting those companies deliver the R&D element of those projects. So those generally are funded through either Welsh Government or Innovate UK, and have various intervention rates. So I can have the next slide, please. So in terms of the support that's available from the university to help companies start their journey, if you like, if you're new to the university and you haven't worked with us before, we have the facility USW Exchange, who are very kindly hosting this event, and they are a hub for business engagement with the university. So they're a first port of call, which I'd encourage you to get in contact with. They have small amount of funding to kick things off and get the your journey started, to enable you to identify areas that the university can work with the company on. If I can have the next slide, please. So I'm just going to briefly, hopefully if the technology will work with us, show you a short video of an innovation project that was developed by the university to do with energy monitoring and management for medium-sized businesses. So Katrina, if I can ask you to start the video. Thank you.
Run was a spin-off business from the University of South Wales, focusing on reducing energy consumption for businesses that use significant amounts of energy. We were showing that we could typically reduce energy consumption, therefore carbon, by easily 10% and up to 25% for most people, just by getting a better understanding of their consumption patterns.
What we created was an automated system that looks at energy consumption, and it identifies the typical patterns of consumption. It creates triggers against which warnings can be generated. These triggers can then be used by energy managers to intervene and reduce the energy consumption. And the effect is better management of energy and lower spend for companies. Humans are creatures of habit. Businesses are creatures of habit. What this means is that these patterns exist. The trick really is to use the appropriate scientific approach to be able to identify these patterns. Once you learn these patterns, you'll be able to design systems that optimize energy use. What this means is that energy waste can be minimized to a point where it's no longer an issue.
As a business, we were bought by npower, one of the big 6 energy suppliers in the UK. At that stage, we'd already saved 300,000 tonnes of carbon from customers. It meant a significant reduction in their energy costs, but also a big reduction in the environmental impact of typically 20%.
I think the use of science to answer real-life problems can result in some really interesting solutions. Net zero carbon economy is a fantastic target to have. Definitely managing electricity is one of the things that can deal with quite effectively and quickly.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm not sure if I'm back on screen, but I wonder if you can hear me. Thank you. I don't know if Katrina, you can hear me, but
Yeah, you're
good. Brilliant. Well, thanks very much for your time, everyone. I've come to the end of our presentation. I hope you found that of interest, and I'd like to hand over to Leah from NatWest.
Brilliant. Thanks a lot, Lucas, and a great video as well. It's lovely to see things actually in action. So hi, everyone. It's been great to hear from our other panelists so far. What I now wanted to go over is kind of what NatWest are doing in terms of supporting our customers transition to net zero, or just taking their tentative first steps into thinking about how to decarbonise their business, for example. So what I really wanted to focus on today is what can you tangibly do with the assistance of NatWest to help your business today. One of those first things that we've kind of rolled out recently is a partnership with EV8. So this can all be found on Google, and essentially it allows you to look at your vehicle use. So it could either be your personal vehicle use, or if you've got a small fleet as part of your SME business, you can use this app on your phone. Simply download from, sorry about that, got a call coming through on my phone at the same time. You can download this from either Google Play or the Apple Store, and essentially it'll download on your phone, and every journey that you do, it tracks essentially whether you're going near charging infrastructure, what the range of that journey was, and essentially gives you some tips as to whether you could transition to an EV vehicle and still be able to do the same journeys. So that's something we just brought in from September, and it's been great to see that downloaded by a lot of our customers, and it almost gives you that confidence around electric vehicles. We hear a lot of stories in the media about range anxiety, or is an electric vehicle kind of too soon to invest in, and this tool just kind of helps you see a bit of bespoke data tailored to your exact actions as to whether it would be something suitable for you. So that was one of the kind of first tangible items that NatWest wanted to kind of bring to our customers and help them in their transition to their fleet becoming a lot less carbon intensive. We've also got our business builder resources, and these are open to customers or non-customers. Again, just find that on Google by Googling NatWest Business Builder. And within that, we've got some modules on climate and those first kind of tentative steps you as an SME could take in order to try and decarbonise. So that's listed as 10 bullet point actions, because we know how complicated it can be. You kind of see all the climate change information, all vast reports from the IPCC. You've got COP26 going on for the next 2 weeks, and there'll be a lot of announcements. So how do you know as a business how to cut through all of that information but really know those key action points? So I'd really kind of recommend going on Business Builder and seeing if there's anything that's feasible for your business to do, and just as a real support, really. You'll also have seen that we've got our kind of partnership with ECCI. So this is part of Edinburgh University, and over the next year or so, you'll be seeing more and more information come out kind of to support SMEs. It's purely SME educational resources that will be coming from that relationship. So again, keep your eyes peeled for that. Again, just for SMEs, because we know SME businesses, it's so hard to know where to start and where to get that advice. I think Beth, alluded to that earlier. Where do you start, and how do you know where to start? So I think that's a real key kind of point of call for you guys. We've also got our partnership with Swoop. So essentially this is a grant finder, and it applies to all types of grants, but it also has climate grants on there. So for example, if within Wales there's a specific borough or region that's offering grants, it will bring those up after a postcode search. So again, I'd really recommend you to go onto that Swoop tool, again, just found by Googling Swoop on Google and just seeing if there are any grants that are relevant to your business. Again, we know a lot of the kind of barriers to investment, as Bethan went through on her slides, was cost and how that kind of affects your cash flows going forward. But if you can get a grant that really helps you start your journey and really decreases that funding requirement, that's obviously a great first step to take. We're also working on obviously our core financing capabilities. So as part of the NatWest group, we've got Lombard, who are able to offer asset finance. So essentially, if you were looking at purchasing solar panels, you could use Lombard asset finance in order to finance those. And you can spread that over a 7-year term. So the ability there is to try and match your savings through energy costs. If this is feasible for your business to have just solar energy come through, obviously at a lesser cost than what you might be paying today, and then kind of factor those savings into how you repay your facility with Lombard. That's how we see a lot of these renewable energy kind of assets working. Hopefully, in the majority of cases, there will be a saving from putting in this renewable energy or an energy efficiency asset. And then even though there is maybe a funding requirement that's needed on that, you can hopefully match your finance payments with the savings made. That obviously isn't guaranteed in all cases, but that would be a great way to kind of research how much is this kind of asset, if it's a solar panel, going to save me, how much is it going to cost me in finance, and how do they kind of tailor up together, and is it a worthwhile investment? So you'll see there, those are just some real key tools that you can find externally to you, with most of those available for non-customers as well. And it's just to show that we want to help our customers decarbonise. We want to be part of your decarbonisation journey. And we realise that some people are right at the start and they need education materials to know where to start. And some people are actually really progressed. You know what you want to do, but you've got a financing need. So do feel free to get in touch with NatWest. Again, if you Google NatWest Green Hub, you'll see a lot of materials on there, which are in terms of education, and also how to get into talk to one of our relationship managers about a particular financing need. So that's on there as well. But we just want to make sure that everyone's knows these resources exist. As I've already referred to, there's so much information out there. We just want to try and put that all in one place for you guys, and that's the NatWest Green Hub. What are we doing as well as NatWest to really show we're serious about this climate transition? We're one of the principal partners of COP over the next 2 weeks. So as you can imagine, a lot of our kind of our colleagues around the bank are up in Glasgow at the moment and really understanding what's happening and what we can kind of hope to see come out of some COP26 agreements. We've also committed to halving the impact of our financing by 2030. In terms of our carbon emissions. So again, we're really walking the walk on this, rather than just making kind of statements around what we'd aspirationally like to do for the climate. We've committed to that externally by 2030. And we also want to make sure we're climate positive by 2025. We were able to become carbon neutral as an organisation in 2020. And hopefully by 2025 we can become carbon positive instead. So as I referred to in the opening of this webinar, that would be taking carbon out of the atmosphere from NatWest being in existence. So those are kind of our aims for the next 5 and 10 years, which again just kind of show our real commitment to the climate space, and not only us reducing our emissions, but really assisting our customers in reducing their emissions, or new customers to us in that. So thank you very much for listening to us. What I'll do now is I'll open up into our panel Q&A. So I'd invite all our panelists to come off of, to show their video, and welcome to come off mute as well, in order to have some questions. For anyone who hasn't posed any questions that they may have already, you can access that by putting it into the chat hub. On my screen, that's right at the top, and it's almost got a messaging icon with a couple of lines through it. So hopefully those of you who do have any questions are able to access that and post a question on there. So we had one come through earlier that I know Bethan's been interacting with. So the question was from James. So it was around, how do lenders see reducing emissions as increasing cash flow to pay off the additional debt? Clearly the additional debt burden needs to be covered. And I know, Bethan, you put some comments in the chat there, but I didn't know if you wanted to expand on that at all.
Yeah, sure. No, I think it's a really important question from James, actually, and something that comes up quite a lot in our conversations. You know, I think there's an inevitable financial impact of undertaking some of these net zero actions for businesses. So it's really important for funders to acknowledge that. And I know that a lot of the funders and investors we speak with are looking at, you know, different investment strategies, and looking at, you know, you, Leah, mentioned about looking at the terms of repayment and things like that, to try to make it a little bit more flexible for businesses to access, and make it easier for them to access the funding they need, whilst also achieving those net zero goals. So I guess it'd be interesting from NatWest's point of view, Leah, if you're able to explore that further in terms of you know, that additional financial burden for businesses and their ability to make those repayments.
Yeah, and that's it. I covered that slightly in my presentation, but I think the key thing is really looking into that proof point. So often when I've worked with customers before, they've got a quote for a solar panel system, and it says on there what your kind of kilowatt hour savings might be. So how many units of electricity do you need from the solar panel? How many may you need from traditional kind of sources of electricity to top that up? So it's really working out those figures, making sure you're clear as to what the system might deliver in terms of savings, and then kind of totting that up against the cost of finance that you can get in a quote from NatWest or another funder. And it may seem like a lot of work, but hopefully the supplier of the kit will be able to kind of give that information, and then the customer or the SME can really make that decision, an informed decision, rather than I really hope this can deliver me savings that helps me in the financing cost. So I think that's a really important point there. We've also got a pre-submitted couple of questions, which I'll just head on to now. So there's one for you, Lucas, in terms of what makes a successful collaborative research and innovation project.
Yeah, well, to us, collaboration is all about trust and, having really clear expectations right from the beginning. Obviously, around innovation, we recognise businesses' interest in creating value from the research. The university has academic expectations, as we're an educational provider, but what we will do when we establish a partnership is make sure that we've got a clear agreement and a contract in place with the business we're working with, so that contributions from both sides are clearly stated right from the outset, and the expectations in terms of what's going to happen to the results, in terms of the intellectual property, who will manage that, how will it be accessed by the business partner, and what's the longer term plan. We're not just concerned about the next 1 or 2 years. We're looking at a long term plan to exploit the IP coming out of the collaborative research. So yeah, I think expectations, managing expectations, and having a clear understanding from the outset is a good recipe for a successful partnership.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it'll be really interesting to see over the next 10-15 years those new technologies that come to the fore and really mean that getting to net zero hopefully isn't as hard as it currently seems. Obviously it's wishful thinking, but we hope to see those technologies, and hopefully you, Lucas, are spearheading that for us. So that's absolutely brilliant to hear. I wondered as well, just around Net Zero Wales. I know the plan was kind of issued last week. I don't know if any of the panelists would like to comment on that in any kind of further detail, just to outline what the commitments were and how that maybe affects the SMEs that are on the call today.
Yeah, I'm happy to take a bit more on that, Leah, if I can expand a little more. I mean, the plan was out last week. It's a meaty plan, so there's around 300 pages to wade through, and over 200 commitments and policy drivers from Welsh Government. I think there's probably a couple of interesting points for the audience today in terms of the SMEs. As I mentioned when I spoke, a lot of the policy drivers are really focused on the larger industrial emitters and what needs to be done there. But there's a clear commitment in there from Welsh Government that they will be looking to see what SMEs' commitment is to net zero as part of accessing any Welsh Government support, whether that's grant or business support. Is that we have something called the economic contract in Wales, that if Welsh businesses are trying to access support from Welsh Government, they need to put commitment in there, and environmental will become an even bigger part of that equation. There's lots of other interesting areas that could be relevant for SMEs. I mean, residential buildings is a huge challenge, particularly retrofitting existing buildings, and the government there are focusing their effort on social housing to begin with, so something that is more under their control, and they've got a scheme called Optimised Retrofit at the moment that is rolling out solutions to the social sector. So there's a significant commitment there, and obviously what they're hoping to do is to stimulate the supply chain so that businesses can see some certainty in terms of demand for their products, and we can start to build a good supply chain within Wales, so that the second challenge then, which is the non-social housing, so the individuals' housing, which is a massive challenge for us to address. But if we can effectively prove the concept with social housing, there's an opportunity there. But there's opportunities for SMEs, there's opportunities for businesses to be supplying in that area. I mean, there's a lot of talk about green jobs, and I think it's kind of getting into the detail there of what does that mean, and ensuring that we've got the right skills to deliver that, and we keep the benefits within Wales, and you can extend that to renewable energy as well. You know, it would be great to see offshore wind, but it'd be even better to see the benefits of offshore wind remaining in Wales. The supply chain is here, and investment is needed in our ports, etc., to make sure that we can do that. So that's a couple of little headlines that have come out of it. They've committed in there for the public sector to be net zero by 2030. So there's a commitment in there for all of public sector entities as well, which is encouraging to see, you know, again, them putting their money where their mouth is and making those commitments forward.
Yeah, I just think it's great to see that actual clarity come out and those real commitments, especially around kind of public sector by 2030. It shows that is a commitment made, and it really does mean that other people follow, which is great to see. And we've had a question from Derry that's kind of related to that point, so I'll just read that out. So how do we try to ensure that businesses receiving investment seek to provide good quality jobs and growth so that the future economy doesn't compound existing uncertainty in the labour market, and that any displaced workers due to net zero planning aren't far worse off, which will damage our economy in the long term? So I guess this is all kind of around the just transition, isn't it, really? So as we're adapting to the impacts of climate change, we're all adapting at the same time, and we're not leaving anyone behind, and that people who maybe are on a kind of a really challenging piece around COVID, they're really struggling as a company now, they're not left behind, and they're given kind of the support. So I don't know if any of the other panelists want to come in on that at all.
Not much different to what you said, really, Leah. I think that just transition is absolutely key, and that came across very strongly in the Welsh Government documentation. For me, a lot of this comes down to skills and making sure that people have the right skills to adapt to, you know, whatever direction the market takes us in, and you know, and that goes right the way down to schools and universities and other higher education to make sure people have got the right skill set going forward.
Yeah, definitely. We're right at the start of the journey, aren't we? So those big questions really need to be answered, and they need to be at the beginning of planning and pivotal into making sure that those are the actions we're taking, and we're driven by that just transition, not in a quick, oh, we could save some money here by doing some sustainable actions. It's all got to be looked at in one collective around ESG and in just transition. So it's great to hear that. Perfect. Okay, I think we haven't got any further questions on the chat, and I'm conscious of time, gone over our kind of allocated 1 hour, but it's been a brilliant conversation, and thanks so much to everyone who's attended today. Bethan's put some brilliant material also on the chat, so I'd really encourage those who are still on the call to have a look at those resources. Again, we know there's a lot of information out there, but it's really great to see some hubs that are collating that together, so you've at least got one point to go to get your updates. But really appreciate your time today, and thank you very much again.
Thanks all.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye now.